1830. Well, I got a message. Train technology was still in its infancy. Here's a picture of our mass transit before 1830. You notice it's a stagecoach. It has 4 horses pulling it. Now, the advantages of canals is that it took 4 horses to pull 1 ton, like this wagon. It took 2 mules to pull 50 tons on the canal. So obviously that was a great advantage. By 1825, the Erie Canal was finished, bringing prosperity to people along its length. Today, 90% of the population of New York State lives in a 20-mile radius of the Erie Canal, if you can believe it or not. The success of the Erie caused a demand by many counties not connected to the Erie to have a canal of their own. Here's a canal map of New York State. Everything in red are canals. 17 surveys were conducted for possible connections called laterals to the Erie Canal. Half of these were eventually built, including the Black River and the Chenango canals. Now, this is the Black River going north. Going south from Utica to Binghamton is the Chenango. I think that would be a great idea to have connecting canals, but not all were in favor of building a canal connecting Utica to Binghamton. Many state legislators were opposed to construction, citing 3 main arguments. One was that there was not enough water at the summit to supply the canal. Second, the cost of construction would exceed the $1 million budget for the project. And that's why I called my book The $1 Million Ditch, because that's what was allotted for its construction. And thirdly, tolls would not pay for the construction and upkeep of the canal. Now, water supply at the summit was the chief argument against building the Chenango Canal. Now, if you look at the arrows, the one at the bottom shows the Erie Canal at Utica, and the one at the top shows the summit level at Bulkville. It's basically pouring water down a staircase. It was 706 feet higher than the Erie Canal summit. So you can see why people didn't think this was going to work, considering there was no natural water supply at the Bulkville summit level. Another argument was that the canal would be too costly to build. This map of a 4-mile section of the canal shows the many canal structures that were needed to be built. The many aqueducts, culverts, locks, and wasteways in the first 20 miles alone would be costly. Many legislators thought the canal costs were underestimated, exceeding the budget proposed of $1 million. If you see where Clinton is here at the top, it's Lock 19 is right behind Kenny's drugstore in Clinton, and Lock 37 is behind the Deansboro Cemetery. You can see all these structures had to be built, and you can figure a lock was at least $1,000 at the 1834 rate. So that was pretty expensive. So what do you do when you want to get a canal bill passed? Well, you get a bunch of people that are going to be lobbyists, and the Chenango Canal Committee was formed. The committee was formed to drum up support for the canal. Its members were made up of prominent men from each county that the canal would pass through. Their mission was to answer all the objections of the lawmakers and get the canal bill passed. Here listed is some of the members of the Canal Committee. One's from Oneida County were Fortune C. White, which is pictured here, and Reuben Tower of Oneida County. Now, Reuben Tower, I did a program recently on him. He was a member of the Canal Committee. He was arguably the hardest working lobbyist for the canal. As a successful whiskey baron from Waterville, he knew that it was important to have dependable transport routes to markets. A man ahead of his times, he accurately predicted in his widely distributed pamphlet that wood supplies would be depleted and that coal would become an important import, a product that can only be transported cheaply by canal from Pennsylvania. Ironically, after his death, his son Charlemagne would conspire with Alfred Munson to secretly buy up a large coal deposit in Pennsylvania. And you'll hear a lot about Alfred Munson through this talk. He was quite the player. This is the tower home that still exists in Waterville. I, by fate, I guess, live on a section of the property that once belonged to Reuben Tower. So I don't know if it's like Kismet or not. The Canal Committee thought to gain support for the canal by having Erie Canal engineers survey the Chenango Canal route, and by their testimony, sway people to vote for the canal. They included James Geddes, Owens Foreman, Nathan Roberts, Holmes Hutchinson, and the picture of Benjamin Wright that I have featured here. These are all engineers on the Erie Canal, and Benjamin Wright was the chief engineer. So they thought by getting their endorsement, they could sway voters to vote for the canal. And incidentally, they all said the canal could be built and endorsed it. This is Gaius Butler of Clinton. He was a surveyor at the time with the canal construction, and this is all the equipment that which he would have to carry to conduct a survey. Pictured here is a Jacob staff, chains, compass, and a logbook. Governor William Marcy, a canal advocate, was elected in 1833. In order to be elected, Marcy knew that he would have to support the building of the Chenango Canal in order to carry the counties in which it would pass through, which would be Broome, Chenango, Madison, Oneida. So all those were important votes for him. This is a picture of Lieutenant Governor John Tracy. A resident of Oxford, John Tracy benefited when the canal passed through his property. Together with Governor Marcy, Tracy ensured that the canal bill would be enacted. And as just a side note, my wife used to live in his home. Talk about Kismet. The Chenango Canal Bill passed in 1833 and plans for construction began. It would the construction would start in 1834 and it would go on until 1836. This is Canal Commissioner Bout. The future governor was in charge of overseeing the building of the canal. He appointed his friend and most able man, John B. Jervis, as head engineer of the Chenango Canal. There's John B. Jervis. Jervis had started out as an axeman on the Erie, but quickly rose through the ranks to become an engineer studying under Nathan Roberts and Benjamin Wright. A friend of William Bout, Jervis was a natural choice for chief engineer for the Chenango Canal, although he personally thought that the canal would be a financial failure. Jervis accepted the post. His major challenge was building a canal with no major natural water supply at its summit, a feat never done before in America. He proved scientifically that a system of man-made reservoirs and feeder canals could supply enough water to make the Chenango Canal work. Now, every great thinker has to have his right-hand man. This was William Jarvis McAlpine, who was the principal assistant to Jervis. Now, Jervis invented a system and proved that there was enough water for the canal. And he sent assistant engineer William Jarvis McAlpine to the summit to measure rainfall with a rain gauge and runoff with a sluice. The combined readings from these devices proved that there'd be enough water at the summit to make the canal work. The first time this invention had ever been used to measure water supplies for canals. This is the Eaton Brook Reservoir which was the site of McAlpine's measurements. And I have a lot of people ask me why they have a spillway that looks like a staircase. and that is to break up the energy of the water as it comes down. Because all these dams that were built were made out of dirt. There was no masonry like we would have today. So they were worried about the erosion. So that's why they did these things. Here's a list of his measurements that he made, courtesy of the Jervis Library. You can see over here, Eaton Brook, area of drainage, the depth, rain, depth of area. And you can tell by seconds that how much water was coming out that sluice, combined with how much rainfall measured by a rain gauge. So which was really a neat invention. I would never have thought of it myself to do something like that. And oh, by the way, Eaton Brook Spillway still works 144 years later. With the knowledge that there was enough water at the summit, Jervis had 7 artificial reservoirs constructed to feed the canal. You might recognize some of their names, like the Eaton Brook Reservoir, Hatch Lake, Bradley Brook Reservoir, Lebanon Reservoir, Leland's Pond, Woodsman's Pond, and the biggest, Lake Moraine. In the diagram, you can see where all the blue lines are water, and the red lines are feeder canals, and the black arrows show the direction of the water, and the brown line is the canal. So all these were at the summit level, and they fed the canal and made it work. Now this is the canal route. The canal route linked the Erie Canal at Utica to the Susquehanna River at Binghamton. It was 97 miles long, 4 feet deep, and 40 feet wide. And it was in operation from 1837 to 1877. You can see all these little towns that were along it. Some of them are still there today, and some of them are not. Places like Pecksport do not exist anymore. They're just a dent in the road, really, where, you know, some of these towns really became prominent, like Norwich and Binghamton. Now, building the canal proposed some challenges, and they brought a lot of the ideas left over from the Erie Canal over. Here's a stump puller. It was 16 feet high in the outer wheels. The center wheel is 14 feet high. The center wheel was pulled by a team of horses or mules, which spun the center wheel, which spun the axle, which spun the chain, which pulled up the stump. They said you could pull 40 tree stumps up a day with this mechanism. Now, this is an endless screw device with a worm gear used to pull small trees out. This is my own drawing. The blue arrow shows the crank. Now, you would crank that, which would operate the worm gear, which is right here, which would turn a sprocket, hold a spool of rope. So you would tie your rope to your tree, usually a young sapling, and by cranking it, you could pull it out of the tree, out of the ground. Once all the trees and brush were removed, the digging began. Specially designed plows with sharp cutting blades were used to break up the ground and cut roots. This enabled the canal diggers to more easily dig the soil out of the prism. And basically they used shovels, picks, and wheelbarrows. This is an example of the canal prism in Clinton. This was obviously drained, and it's around circa 1878. You can see how high the banks are, 4 feet. This is a towpath. Just to give you an idea where this is the Agway building today. The school will be right here, and Dollar General will be over in this area. Now, when you build canals, you got to have locks and bridges and aqueducts. And the stone used in many of these structures came from the Putnam Quarry in Oriskany Falls. And that is still in operation today, owned by the Hanson Corporation. This is the rock face over here where the limestone was dug out. Now, limestone was blasted from the rock face with black powder, saying they did not have dynamite at the time. Large stones used in the canal construction were moved by large derricks. And this is a derrick right here. And you can see they had long cables attached in it to keep it upright. And this is the boom that would move rocks onto wagons or a rail if you had one. Here's Norwich Quarry, and this is where stone was used in the southern part for the locks and aqueducts. It also used derricks. This is a better picture. You can see the pulleys and the boom, and they would load rocks on or stone onto your wagons. Building canal structures near rivers or in swamps call for unique building techniques. Featured here is a portable trip hammer. Once assembled, a trip hammer could drive long piles. Those are the telephone pole objects you see in the picture here. They would drive them into the wetland or riverbed, and canal structures were attached to these. A pile looks just like a telephone pole. It's a long, thin, relatively thin wood beam. And today you can still find them. If you look real close, right, here's one, here's another one. These are in the Oriskany Creek by the Chenango Canal aqueduct over the Oriskany Creek in Franklin Springs. When construction of stone structures was required, the soil was dug to the hard pan. Sleepers were laid down in layers. Planking was secured to the sleepers, and then building stone was laid down upon the planking. This afforded a cheap, level structure that you can now build your lock or your aqueduct or your bridge abutment. Here's an example of exposed sleepers and iron fasteners that can be seen at the White Creek Aqueduct in Clinton, which is just behind the town barn on the White Creek. You can see there's a rod right here that held all the wood down. Featured here is an original Jervis drawing plan for a canal lot. To overcome elevation changes, 116 locks were built on the Chenango Canal. The locks were 100 feet long, with a locking chamber of 75 feet in length and 15 feet wide. That meant that's how big your boats were going to be, because you can't build them any bigger. 2 lock gates controlled the water in the lock. This is a side view here. This is looking down upon it. Here's one lock gate, here's the other. And this is where the lift would be up here. Here's a lock diagram showing the makeup of a typical lock gate on the canal. And you can see right here, this is all man-powered. You get on this balancing beam, and you could pull the gate out from the recess in the wall. It had a lever that controlled a little gate here to let water in slowly or out. And it had iron brackets that would hold the beam against the wall, keep it from falling out. And the gate would rest up against a wooden structure in the bottom, keeping it firm. And these all pointed like arrows going upstream. And the water pressure against the gates would keep it closed once it was in place. Jervis had charts for these engineers to reference when they're building lock gates. This led to a uniformity in construction. You can see that this is the bracket that holds the gate post and how it would go deep into the stone with these bolts. And this is the brackets that they would put on the wood to hold it together. I've only found one lock that still had its hardware on it. This is on a lock behind the Deansboro trailer park on Route 12. Now, stones for locks were moved into place by derricks. They weren't ancient aliens helping them. They actually had these long derricks that would move black stone into place. This image is of Lock 28 construction on the Black River Canal. Lock 32 on the Chenango Canal. This view shows the many stones that made up the lock wall. Wood was attached to these walls, and when wet would swell to make the lock watertight. After the close of the canal in 1878, this wood was quickly scavenged for fireplace wood. The skill of the canal masons can be seen in this graceful curve in the wall of Lock 38 in Deansboro. Now, all locks were used to move boats up or down elevations called lifts. This lift in Lock 67 helped boats overcome a 10-foot lift. So your boats would come in, they would fill the lock chamber up, and the boats would slowly rise up, and then they would go on their way to the next level. This is the full length of the 100-foot lock walls that can be seen on Lock 67 between Salisville and Bulkville. There was only one combination lock on the Chenango Canal, and this was located in Riscony Falls. These 3 locks overcame a lift of 30 feet. This is a view of the middle section looking north. This is part of a demolition. You can tell these people are rigging up a derrick to take stones out of here. And back here is the train trestle that overcame the 30 feet of lift that this canal lock overcame. This is the middle section of the combo lock looking south. 2 men to the right are standing in a lock sluice. This was a device that diverted water around the lock so water could be kept flowing in the canal at the bottom of the structure. This photos of the center of Oriskany Falls shows 3 locks in close proximity of each other. There were 76 locks from Utica to Bulkville. So they're very, very, very close. Here's lock. There's a first lock. There's another lock. There's another lock. And over here would have been another lock. Right now, this is all park. The Oriskany Catholic Church would be right over in here just to give you a reference. This is a picture of Lock 19 in Clinton. This would be right behind Kenny's drugstore in town. The construction of a 97-mile-long canal necessitated a need for hundreds of canal bridges. The early ones of wood became impractical because they started to rot and fall. And in one case in Clinton, there was a Mr. Palmer on his way to church in his horse and buggy and never made it because he went into the canal. So there was a need for replacement. And the design that replaced it was the Whipple Bridge. Here's a picture of Squire Ripple. He was the first engineer to understand the stresses in bridge trusses. He developed a theoretical formula to calculate stresses in bridges. His patented bowstring truss bridge design was the first to use cast iron for compression and wrought iron for tension. New York State adopted his design as a standard for all canal bridges. However, the state refused to pay him royalties for his patent, declaring it was for the good of the people. This is a College Street bridge facing south. You can see this Whipple Bridge iron struts supporting the wood planking in front of the floor. Lock 19 is in the background. Incidentally, this is also the bridge that Grover Cleveland crossed on his way to school every day. So this is what he would have been looking at. This is the Court Street Bridge in Utica. Those are the Alfred Munson Utica cotton mill behind it, which those buildings are still there today as you leave Utica. Here's the Bulkville Bridge. Note the building in the background is now the Landmark Tavern. The small white building in the background is now the Chenango Canal Museum. You can see that there was no worry about kids playing on this bridge, which is probably about 20 feet to the water here. The Bulkville Bridge collapsed. Although durable, Whipple bridges were not indestructible. This truck fell with the bridge in 1925. Here's the top of the truck right here. It collapsed 52 years after the canal was abandoned. When trains made their appearance, they crossed the canal on swing bridges. This image is of the original plans for the swing bridge in Clinton. This would have been around Robinson Road. The center of the structure would be right in the middle of the canal, and it would swing, and boats could still go by it. And then when the train came, it would swing back into position, and the trains would go right over the top of it. When the canal had to cross rivers and streams, aqueducts and culverts were used. Featured here is a Jervis drawing of a large aqueduct. This is an example of the largest aqueduct on the canal, which was in green. It carried the canal over the Chenango River. It was raised above the river 25 feet. So these towers were 25 feet in the air. And you can imagine the weight of all that water on it. Today, the ruins of a 20-foot tower on the Green Aqueduct is still standing today, although the rest of them have all disappeared. A small two-arch aqueduct carried the canal over a stream in Earlville. This is a two-arch aqueduct in Clinton. And sadly, this does not look like that anymore. This whole area was dug out and a lot of the stone was destroyed. The ruins of a wood trough aqueduct can be found on the Oriskany Creek near Southsville. A wooden structure spanned the creek connecting the stone abutments. Now canal water flows into the Oriskany Creek, which eventually empties into the Erie at Oriskany. This is where the wood would cross here, carrying the boats. The canal carried many items along its length. One of the most important was coal, which fed the growing textile industry in central New York. Featured here is the Utica Steam Cotton Mill, owned in part by Alfred Munson. And if you look closely to the corner here, you can see a coal boat unloading coal for the steam plants. The many textile machines were run on coal-fed steam plants. Featured here is a woolen mill in Clinton. And look at all the machinery that ran off a central power plant. No safety guards you can in place anywhere. This is a view of a coal shed on the canal in Utica. Coal would be offloaded on these sheds and they would be distributed to homeowners, businesses, and what have you. This is after the canal closed, of course. The coal shed is visible in the background. The Utica Cutlery Factory is to the left of the canal. Eventually, the canal was filled in and became Route 12 through Utica. So if you're running by the cutlery factory, you're running right on top of the canal. I think pretty much that the signs are identical. This was taken in 1917. People who had items to move by canal boat would bring them to forward and storage buildings like the Hibbard and the Alexander in Clinton. The Whipple Bridge is visible just to the left of the frame. Now, if you had like apples you wanted to send to New York City, you would bring them down to the Hibbard and Alexander. You would sign up for a boat, they would pick them up, and then they would bring back whatever money you had. And vice versa, if you had some fine goods coming from, say, Binghamton, they could be dropped off there and you could go and pick them up there. So they were like the middleman. This building also was a warehouse in Clinton. It became the Agway store, and it's still in operation today. Also in Clinton were iron mines. They would ship their ore across town to Franklin Springs. The Franklin Furnace used canal boats to ship coal for their operation to smelt the iron out of the ore. And then they would use their finished product and send it back down the canal, either to Binghamton or to Utica. Pig iron, you can see, is loaded on the loading dock here. It was taken and then you could pound it out or melt it into whatever item you wanted. This is when the trains started coming. The canal would have been on the other side. Now I threw this picture in because this was the last Brothertown Indian, Romance Wyatt, who lived in his house in Deansboro. He was a boatman on the Chenango Canal. Took time to fight in the Civil War. He was wounded at Gettysburg. He was later buried overlooking his beloved canal in the Deansboro Cemetery. Now, the canal also transported stone. Many stone buildings were erected along the canal by canal masons, like this stone church in Oriskany Falls and the stone church in Clinton. Both stand today. Just to give you a reference, the stone church is right here in Oriskany Falls. In the center is the 3-lot combine. And in the foreground is the train trestle, which was 1,000 feet long, which carried trains up the same incline that the boats had to go. Here's a canal view of the center of Oriskany Falls. Oriskany Falls also had warehouses for the canal. This one still stands as an apartment building. Further up the canal heading south is a view of Southville. On the hill above can be seen hop poles. If you see all these, this is a hop yard. Now, hops was a very important cash crop in central New York. And one time it was the hop capital of the world. And you could ship hops and bales on the canal. And I've seen manifests of Southville hops arriving in Chicago. So you know, see how far this canal can reach. Just for reference, this is a hotel Southville today. You go a little bit further south, brings us to Samuel Mott. In 1862, Samuel Mott traveled from his home in the Albany area to Bowfville via the Erie and Chenango canals. Having learned the art of cider making from his grandfather, he seized the opportunity to buy a third interest in a vinegar mill. Eventually, Mott bought out his partners and founded the Mott Cider Company. If I was having a live presentation today, I'd be passing out Mott applesauce. This is his factory on the canal in Bowfville. The large building right here in the foreground is the feed mill today, and it's still standing. The Hotel Bowfville, built on the banks of the canal and the Cherry Valley Turnpike, entertained many canal travelers. This building still stands today. I've actually been in this building, and the very top floor is a dance hall, and there's hooks in the ceiling where they held. You can still see where there was smoke, where they held light for dances and musicians and theatrical acts, and entertained canal travelers, which went this way on the canal, and this was the Cherry Valley Turnpike, now Route 20. And the building still stands today. Across the street, you probably know this building that's a landmark tavern. It's actually one of the first department store building, because we had the John Deere section here, the paint store here, a shoe store here. They had a barber shop up here. So it was a very multi-personal purpose building, which was built by canal masons during the canal era. And the switch is still standing today. Now, this is the canal view headed to Hamilton, which is one of my favorite photos. That's why I picked it for the cover of my book. During the bike craze in the late 1880s, people rode on the abandoned towpath. You can see these folks are out for a nice ride. The cows are all contented. And you can see the barbed wire right here. You can see that the canal is closed and starting to grow in. If you want to travel a little bit farther south, this is the view of the village green in Hamilton. Dirt from the canal construction was used to fill in a swamp in this area, which became the village green. Colgate University is on this side. The Hamilton Library is here. And this is the village green, which is, still a lovely place to go. Hamilton also boasted of a large Whipple Bridge, which is a nice pedestrian walkway across it. If you travel a little bit further south to Norwich, you would visit the Maydall Hammer Factory, which used water from the canal sluice to run machinery. This is the canal sluice. This is the lock. When steam power came, they quickly switched over to coal, which they got from the canal, so it was perfect. I actually got a Maydall hammer in my collection, which I found in a garage sale I bought for like $2. Was one of my greatest finds. Now, Norwich during the Civil War formed a regiment, the 114th, and they traveled south on canal boats. Sadly, only half of the regiment ever survived the war. And this is a reunion that they had in 1897. I'm pretty sure these cannonballs here did not fit in this cannon. But I'd also like to note that there was an African American in the group. Right here holding the colors. Now, I'd like to add to the Civil War story. We're talking about Sarah Rosetta Wakeman, AKA Private Lyons Wakeman. In 1862, she left home at 18 to work as a boatman on the Chenango Canal, posing as a man. She enlisted as a man under the alias of Lyons Wakeman in the 153rd New York Volunteer Infantry. I think the reason she jumped ship was the enlistment bonus, which was $152, which was big money then. Sadly, Private Wakeman died of disease in 1864. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about boats. Now, pictures of Chenango Canal boats are extremely rare. This picture of a packet boat in Oxford can be seen coming out from under a bridge. Packet boat service was from Norwich to Binghamton. There were too many locks to the north to make the packet boat travel viable. That was as it was faster to walk than ride on a boat. Here's a picture of a canal boat from a glass plate in Oxford. You see it right here. Looks like a coal boat. This building still stands, and this is now Route 12. Like in Utica, they just put dirt over the canal and made a road out of it. That's one of my favorite pictures of a canal boat. This is a picnic boat dated August 1st, 1876, which is leaving Green. These men are standing on a swing bridge. One thing I found interesting about this photo, that there's not one woman visible, and I blew this whole thing up. There's not one. So I think this more was a men's outing, maybe a Civil War reunion picnic. And this was the Lily Phelps, which I found out was a coal boat. So they must have put planking across the hold to hold up all these people sitting on it. The downfall of the canal, railroads. Now, John B. Jervis, who ran the first locomotive in America, invented a new train that spelled the downfall of the canal and canals all over the world. The experiment, which was his name for this locomotive, featured a bogie truck wheel system in the front of the locomotive that pivoted the wheels as they rounded corners, keeping the train on the track. Believe it or not, this model could achieve speeds of 80 miles per hour. The slow-moving canal boats couldn't compete. Now, if you look closely, these are the bogie truck wheels. You see this pin right here? This allowed the wheels to pivot underneath the locomotive. So none of these wheels are fixed, except for the back one. And this kept the train on the tracks. Just like if you lock up the steering wheel on your car and you try to make a turn, it's going to keep going straight. That's why these wheels were so important to keep the train on the tracks. As a result, a lot of these signs became quite common. This is a auction sale flyer in 1859 for selling one canal boat and 4 boat horses. And they were taking sums of $25 cash for notes on them. The former Hibbard and Alexander forwarding and storage business in Clinton became a train station. Note the Whipple Bridge that was over here is no longer there. It's been covered over with a wood. So trains took over for the canal. Canal officially closed in 1878. People didn't know what to do with the inconvenient ditch. In Oriskany Falls, they tried to cover it with wood. You can see the wood they're trying to cover it up with. Most of these, well, in Oriskany Falls, these are all filled in with dirt. Soon after closure, the locks were stripped of the wood and started to deteriorate. Here's a picture of the 3-lock combine in Oriskany Falls. Look how it's all becoming ratty. Wood's falling in, rocks are still in there, starting to fill in. This is what the canal looks like today. This is lock 38 behind the Deansboro Cemetery. Here's a lock that's in between Oriskany Falls and Salzville. And here's lock 32 in Deansboro. And these are just some of the things that you ought to know about the Chenango Canal. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Joanne, you there?
Yeah, thank you,
Okay.
Wade. That was fascinating. So we have time now for questions. And if it's okay, I'll kick off the questions with
Sure.
with one that I've been wondering about.
Sure.
I know that, well, my question is about music, Wade, because with regard to the Erie Canal, you know, there's at least one famous song that probably everybody knows. And I'm just wondering, was there, you know, the song about 16 miles on the Erie Canal?
It's 15 miles.
Or sorry, 15 miles. Uh-oh, I knew I was going to get it wrong.
Well,
Is there
15 miles
anything-
is what the length of a tour for any boatman on a canal. They would go 15 miles and then change horses.
Oh,
That's why
okay.
that's mentioned. I thought you were going to talk about the 2 organ factories that were built on the Chenango that transported organs and pianos. But I don't have any songs that I know about. But I do know, like, you know the term shenanigans?
Yeah.
Allegedly, that was from Irish workers who worked on the canal. They got in trouble and they called them shenanigans from Chenango.
Wow.
That's funny.
That is very funny. Wade, I'm going to read you a couple of questions that have
Sure.
come up in the chat.
Okay.
So the first one is, how long did it take to go through a lock, and how long were the boats stationary?
It took, if you're really, really good, you probably could get through in 3 to 6 minutes. It's
Wow.
depended on what you were carrying. If you were light, of course, it went faster. And then if you had to wait to get through a lock, which rarely happened because there was a lot of traffic on the Chenango like there was on the Erie. But there is some accounts where there was a break in the canal which you had to replace. And if you had one break anywhere in the canal, that stopped the whole canal from going. So you had to fix that. Of course, boats would pile up. And then there was
Wow.
whoever has the biggest boatman, which would usually duke it out to see who would go first. So, yeah. So
Interesting.
it would take, I think the fastest route from Utica to Binghamton was 12 days, conducted by, if you believe it or not, the Greyhound was the name of the boat.
Wow.
But you got to imagine that just from Utica to Belleville, there was 76 locks. So you've 6 minutes in each lock, plus you can only go 5 miles. The speed limit on the canal was 5 miles an hour, because if you go any faster, the wake would wash away the banks. So that was regulated. So it was kind of slow. But if you were moving 80 tons of coal, this is the way to go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, I've got a couple more questions for you in the chat.
Okay.
The next one is about, let's see, whether the feeder waterways are still in existence, and if so, what do they now drain into?
Okay. All the lakes that were formed still have water pouring out. They all filter down toward Hamilton at the summit level, and they go into the canal, and the canal goes with water in it all the way to Southville. And if you remember that aqueduct, the trough aqueduct, all that water pours into the Oriskany Creek now, and that water eventually ends up in Oriskany into the Barge Canal, or the Erie Canal as it's called today. So yeah, and it's still maintained by the state for that purpose. So that's why that you see all those, they're maintained, like all the dams are maintained by the state. Well, actually it's by the Thruway Authority now. Kind of ironic. They control all the dams, and they all still work, and they're all used for recreation now. Like during droughts, people complain about the level of the lakes going down, but they were never designed for boating or recreation. They were designed to make this canal work.
Okay.
So that's a good question.
Yeah. Wade, we've still got some questions in the chat, but I'm gonna take a break from that because Shirley's got her hand up. So Shirley, why don't you ask your question, and then we'll go back to the chat questions when you've had a chance.
Okay, actually, my question was also in the chat. It was at the top. You mentioned that there was this when you had 30 feet to lift, that they would put in 3 locks. It was 10 feet about the most that one lock could raise a boat.
Well, there was one that was 15 feet, but mostly were 10 or 5 foot lifts. In Oriskany Falls, they used 3, and there were 10-foot lifts for each lock. So they went up 30 feet roughly. And sadly, that lock is covered with tons and tons of dirt right now. You'll never see that again.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, moving on through the chat. Next question, Wade, has to do with workers. So what about canal workers? Were they mostly immigrants? Were they local farmers?
Okay.
And did every lock have a lock worker?
Okay, that's an excellent question. A lot of questions I've had to learn on the way through this. During the construction, it was mostly Irish and immigrants that came up from New York City via the Erie Canal that worked on this. Unlike the Erie Canal, which had a lot of local workers on it, the Chenango was mainly mainly an Irish project. They had hundreds and hundreds. There was a work camp in Hamilton. They had 500 Irishmen working there. And they said they caused a lot of trouble in the taverns in town. As far as local workers, there was a lot of local contractors. Unlike today, when you have one contractor do a huge state project, these were set out for bids, and you might have a mile section, you might have a lock or an aqueduct in that section, and they put bids out, and the lowest bidder got it. And interesting enough, in Clinton, there was a man by name of Barker, who built the Oriskany Creek Aqueduct and Lock 24, I believe. And then when the canal was completed and running, he sued the state because canal ruined his property that it went through. So he had his he had his bread buttered on both sides. But that's a lot of like there's where I used to live. If you've heard of Peck Road, well, Peck was one of the contractors on the Chenango Canal that I know of. But mostly it was immigrants that built this.
Wade, the next question has to do with kind of the economic impact of the canal. So how much did the Chenango Canal contribute to economic growth for the towns along the route, especially Binghamton? And then how badly were they impacted after the canal closed? Or, you know, or because of the railroad, maybe there wasn't a big impact on the economy, but that's kind of the question.
Okay, that's a good question. The canal brought life to all those sleepy little towns along its length. Little towns like Brisbane, Oxford, Greene, Clinton benefited from the canal. It was a boom for everybody that was along it. Everybody prospered. But the state was really interested in making money in tolls. And the canal never made enough tolls for its upkeep or even for its cost, which turned out from $1 million to almost $2 million. So it really never made money for the state. But I think without the canal, Utica would never have prospered because the coal from Pennsylvania coming up the canal made all those factories and ironworks profitable. And that's why Utica became a textile capital for a long time. I can remember when I was a kid, a lot of those mills were still running. So in that case, I think it was very instrumental in forming this whole economies of all these towns along its length. So that was a good question.
Yeah. Next question, Wade, could two boats pass one another, not in the lock, but in the canal itself?
Okay. Now you consider that locks are only 15 feet wide, right? So your boat would be a little less than 15 feet wide because you wanted to get the most freight through a lock, and then you built your boats just to fit through them. So let's say roughly your boats are 15 feet wide. The canal was 40 feet wide. So if you had two boats side by side touching each other, it would only be 30 feet. So you still had 10 feet to spare. So these boats could pass each other with no problem. The only trouble is you would have to back off when you're approaching a lock because it would pinch in. Or to an aqueduct because the aqueducts were only 15 feet wide as well. So no trouble there.
Yeah.
Next
question is.
Can I just interject one thing? If you wanted to know what the Erie Canal looked like when it was first built in 1817, look at the Chenango because it never changed. It was patterned right after the early Erie. Now Erie would expand and become larger, become deeper. The Chenango never did. So if you want a snapshot of what the Erie looked like, look at the Chenango Canal today. But go ahead, Joy. Sorry.
Interesting. Yeah. Next question is just about the highest point of the canal.
The summit level, that's in Bulkville.
Okay.
Yeah, it's 706 feet from Utica to Bulkville, and then it drops like 330 feet to Binghamton.
Okay.
So, and a lot of people get confused because they think of all the lakes, but the lakes are higher than the summit level of the canal. That's why it works because the water flows downhill.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I just want to pass this along, just a message of appreciation from Kirkland that they appreciated it and learned so much. And then,
Okay.
yep, on to another question. So how did they manage boats going in each direction or in two directions? And how did they prevent traffic jams?
Traffic jams? Well, the person going upstream had the right of way. It was a harder pull. So if you were going the other direction, you would slacken your ropes and your boat would go over the top of it. So that's how they they did that. So there's sort of rules of the road and common courtesy to make so everything would work. If you didn't, you would have, smash ups, and that wouldn't be good for anybody. Yeah.
Interesting. Let's see. Do we have any more questions from the floor? I think that's pretty much, I think I got everything from the chat.
Okay.
And again, maybe I could ask a question, Wade.
Sure.
Do you mind saying a few words about how you got interested in the canal, or what kind of first gripped you? When did you know you officially had canal fever?
Okay. I got my bachelor's in Syracuse on history, so I've always been a history buff. And I found a book in the Kirkland Town Library that was on display at the counter talking about the Chenango Canal. And I knew it ran through Clinton and Riscony Falls and whatnot. And I kind of piqued my interest. So I started reading and I saw some pictures and they said, hey, this one's in Clinton, or not Clinton, Deansboro, behind the cemetery. So I went looking with my kids. And when you go through some thick brush and then you finally open up to this huge 100-foot stone structure that looks like it's been abandoned for hundreds of years, that's when I got my Indiana Jones moment. And that's what it started, that gripped me. So I just had to learn everything I had to know about. And of course, I went to my local historical society, the Clinton Historical Society, and they were very helpful in providing maps and documents and stuff. And that just hooked me. And that's why I'm a member of the Historical Society now. So I hope they answered your question.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's great. Let's see. Any other questions? Where would you, for those of us who do want to maybe get out and look at some of the old locks or some of the remains of the canal, as you showed in your photos, where are the best places to visit today?
Well, sometimes I'm hesitant to tell people because I've taken groups out and they get to a lock and they start pulling rocks out of the
Okay.
canal wall or
Yeah.
kicking stuff in it, and which just makes me cringe because I actually had one guy wanted to pull stones out for some monument on the new Route 12 project. I said, just go to a quarry. It's a lot cheaper. And but for starters, if you just want to get your feet wet, pardon the pun, if you go to Kinney's in Clinton,
Yeah.
go to the back parking lot, to the very back where the creek runs through.
Okay.
That's the Chenango Canal. And in the very corner, there's still stonework left in the canal. So you can look at that. The next easiest one to visit, if you go to the Deansboro Cemetery,
Mm-hmm.
you go to the extreme right, where there's a few stones out there. Mostly it's a grassy expanse. You go right to where the water's pouring through there, and there's two locks right behind the cemetery. And if you go to the right,
Wow.
there's locks behind the houses in town. So they're the easiest to get to. This one right here, the last slide I showed is lock 32. That's on private property.
Okay.
It's just off the Kirkland Trail, which is the old O&W Railroad, which is probably the best shape lock that's still intact. So if you want to sneak over there one time, that's a big, but there's a lot, and a lot of these locks are right next to the Kirkland Trail, if you only know where to look.
Yeah.
And I'd be glad to show anybody if they wanted really to go out. I can make time to show them where it is or give them a map anyway.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I see a great kind of walking tour or archaeological tour in your future, Wade. I think it'd be really cool.
I would
Yes.
love to.
Yes, please.
Well, I'd like to. Well, there's lock 18 in Clinton. I would love to do a dig on. I think that's in negotiations right now. There's one up in Bulkville that they're trying to get rights for a dig there, so I want to get onto
Wow.
that one. Yeah, I go out there with my trusty trowel and start excavating. Now I found nails that were used for the planking along these locks, just in the debris field. It is wherever he took the wood, he would just pull them out and throw them in the woods. And using a metal detector, I found some of that. So I like doing that kind of technology. But yeah, it's a good walk. And if you're a billy goat, you can get to a lot of them.
Well, Wade, I know you're busy speaking, so I just want to be sure you're seeing some of these lovely compliments you're getting. Great explanation, Wade. I'd never heard the entire story of the canal. That's from Jim Coltart. Catherine says, thank you so much for a very interesting lecture and your great pictures. So
If you want more, buy the book.
yeah, I was gonna say, we haven't yet done a plug for the book, but
We had that on sale at the Clinton Historical Society, or you can go on
Yeah.
Amazon or Barnes and Noble. I've sold, I'm gonna brag a little bit. I sold 700 copies so far, so I'm pretty pleased with its success. A lot of people are into canaling.
Wade, can we get, how hard would it be to get back to that slide, just so people can see once again the title?
Okay,
And
let me,
I think that was the very first slide.
well, let's see if we can go this way.
Yeah, there you go.
No, no, too far, too fast. Technology. There you go.
There it is. Yeah, so there's the book. Really beautiful cover. Okay. And then another compliment, great presentation. Thank you. Just ordered the book. That's from Frank Vlasak.
Oh, cool. Cool.
Yeah, so this was great. And certainly for kind of newbies to the area like myself, really has kind of piqued my interest in this period of history and that particular piece of it. So thank you so much.
No worries.
Anybody else have anything to say or questions? Yeah, well, how about a round of applause for our speaker, if you want to unmute, and then we'll close it up.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Great job,
Wade. That
Wade.
was
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna end the meeting then.
All right.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Would love a walk
Joanne.
on the canal with you.
Okay,
That's right. Okay, thanks, everybody.
All right.
Bye-bye.
bye.
Thanks,
Joanne.
Thanks, Sharon.